Welcome, Patreons, to part 2 of episode 18 of Antifascist Dad Podcast, talking to young people about the Epstein files. I'm Matthew. I'm grateful for your support. I hope this project brings some joy and hope and utility to your ears, to your works and days. Now, in part 1, I thought out loud about how to talk with tweens and teens about the Epstein files from an anti-fascist perspective at a moment of shock and spectacle and fragmentation. I said that the content is one thing, but there's also affective damage downstream of these constant waves of sensational, decontextualized material that can train dissociation rather than understanding or the will to action. Parents and mentors, I think, have to think about becoming anchors rather than amplifiers of panic. I said that, like everyone else, but with less, sort of executive function, young people will encounter the most lurid claims first through influencers and algorithms that bump outrage to the top and downvote evidence. I talked about slowing things down, sticking with what we actually know, refusing speculative excess while still taking abuse extremely seriously because it is real. Extreme abuse of capitalism is here, and it's already the worst. And the conversation needs to shift away from exceptionally evil individuals and toward the material conditions that reward domination, impunity, and the exploitation of women and children. I also pinged a possible upcoming replay of QAnon dynamics where intuition outruns evidence, speculation fills the gaps. And while those intuitions often come from real experiences of systemic abuse that's unresolved, conspiracy thinking ultimately harms survivors and benefits fascism by scrambling the information landscape. So now in this brief follow-up, I want to turn to 2 more issues that I think carry intergenerational weight. Firstly, what do we do when we find out that someone we admire is implicated in a network of abuse? What does guilt by association mean? What does it transform what that person has to offer? And secondly, I think that at all ages, we can confront a decision about how we want to best spend our time. And, sometimes I feel like there's a fork in the road with regard to the time I have. Am I going to spend time refuting lies or building true things? I mean, we will always need to do both, but sometimes it feels like being on the defensive is taking up too much time. And so that's, I think, something to consider and balance out. Over the past several years, young people and kids to varying degrees will have heard about large networks of corruption and abuse in the industry that produces some of the soundtrack for their world. The trials of R. Kelly and P. Diddy, and then in film, the lawsuit against Johnny Depp is another example. These point to subcultures of complicity in which many talented artistic people know that there are abusive acts going on. Victims and their allies can be scared to expose the conspiracy, while those who benefit from their proximity to power suppress the news. What are we to make of the rapper or the R&B star or the Hollywood star and their music or their acting when they're caught up in this? How is it that a person's public-facing artistry did not save them from terrible systems of abuse? I'll use an Epstein files example here that impacted a lot of adults in my sphere, but I think the principles involved hold for any charismatic influencer that the kids might run into and then are disillusioned by. So the example is there were many folks who were shocked to learn that New Age super guru Deepak Chopra was emailing gross and suggestive messages back and forth with Jeffrey Epstein. The exchanges show that he was playing or he was trying to play guru for the sex trafficker using his own branded parody of Indian philosophy. Now, those who were shocked at the Epstein files appearance of Chopra may not have known that there was a sexual harassment suit against him in the late 1990s. And then in 2021, there was an anonymous account from a woman published online who said that he used his guru status at his Ayurveda center to pose as a therapist wizard. And she says she disclosed childhood trauma to him, including sexual abuse. And then she alleges he held power over her in a sexual relationship to which she didn't fully consent. Through the last several years of work on conspirituality, it was clear to me that Chopra was obviously always a charlatan, a pseudoscience huckster. It was also clear to me and many others that he performed a kind of labor on behalf of neoliberalism. The main cultural and political work of New Age spirituality was to lock in the depoliticization of an anxious generation of post-60s liberals, to get them focusing on the self-project rather than class solidarity. Deepak Chopra did for spiritually inclined liberals what Scott Galloway is now doing for young men. Tell people to concentrate on the self instead of creating communities that would challenge the social conditions that oppress them. Now, what did the Chopra-style New Age self-project sound like? It sounded like high vibrations, crystals, manifesting herbs. And who needs feminism if you have the divine feminine? And if you take my course and find your flow, you can thrive in the precariat. You don't need healthcare when you have smoothies and coffee enemas. Yoga means union, but not the labor type of union. And if you can't afford rent, Millennial Starseed, well, your home is right in your heart or in the universe itself. And all of this was kind of a cheesy attempt to sell people on the lie that everything would be all right in the end times if you bought products to perfect your body. And now we're living in the endless echo of this in every commodity offered to us or our kids as some kind of consoling relief. However, Chopra didn't accumulate 3.3 million followers on Instagram by offering nothing. Pretending he wasn't attractive to a lot of people for good reasons, or that those people were simply stupid or gullible, are not going to account for his popularity. As critical as I want to be about his content, many people from many different walks of life found some kind of peace in it. Chopra could teach basic meditation, ideas about interconnectedness with nature. He could tell you that food was a ritual to pay attention to and give you a morning routine that you could start your day with and have a feeling of dignity or self-respect. Like an artist, he could inspire you. And so I can only conclude that he really did meet some deep needs for many people. People can be drawn to charismatic influencers through the same situational vulnerabilities that draw them to cults: job loss, divorce, family estrangement, despondency over the state of the world, doomscrolling through images of genocide, or navigating illness in a predatory medical system. You can be so low in your life that Chancellor Palpatine himself can tell you to take a deep breath to your belly, and you'll feel a bit of relief and then be flooded with gratitude because you associate that relief with Palpatine more than with your own willingness to try something new or to find the force within you. And then on the social side, charismatic groups and cults often offer an ersatz experience of socialism, a shared project and resources. And then people learn to do useful things at spaces that can turn out to be toxic or even dangerous. I learned breathing techniques and meditation and how to cook for 300 people at a time. These are good lifelong skills. And if it came down to it, I could be a base camp cook for a brigade of anti-fascist fighters, and I could help them breathe and rest while giving them food because I was in cults, ironically. But really, while I was there, I learned skills and I did work. Now, everyone misses red flags, and there's no real cultural guidance how to avoid charismatic influence. And now we live in a media culture built on charisma. And this is why I think every kid needs some early inoculation, and I don't think it's complicated. I think that kids can pretty easily learn that overly confident, simplified takes on complex issues spread because their communicators are popular, not because they are accurate. If a creator is never referencing sources, if they're willing to expound on any topic under the sun, if they cannot seem to stop talking, we are seeing charisma in action, which is another way of saying a lack of substance. Further, there can be an anxiety that pushes charisma like fanning a flame when it is attempting to light up a lack of substance. Now, one more thought in this vein for everyone, including kids. When the cracks in a celebrity's image begin to appear, there's always a surge of not only public outrage, but vindication. People will say, I always knew there was something wrong there with that guy. He always gave me a bad feeling. Now, sometimes these folks are retconning their reservations into the past, but there will be a quieter contingent of people who were blindsided, who didn't know it all, and they will feel the implicit mockery and reproach from those who clocked it first. And it's sad to see the followers of some fallen inspiration express shock or grief online only to be met with derision. It really shows how these platforms flatten out human culture in some illusion of everyone coming from the same place, while obscuring the fact that each of us is in a different stage of education and self-awareness and positive community creation. Being out of sync can make the internet unconsciously tactless. Chapter 4. How much disastrous evidence do we need? There is always a flood of bad news, accelerated by acute events like the Epstein files and increasing fascist violence. There seems, by contrast, to be very little reporting on what can be done, what our successes are and might be. And I think a lot of us feel like we're bailing water out of the boat constantly. We have to know and metabolize and protect ourselves against so much. So I have a story about what happened to a guy who invested fully in learning about the trouble of the world, and he spoke the truth as best he could. But it was so horrible, it seemed to paralyze his fellow citizens, while it made no difference to those in power, even though the stakes were existential. So what did he do? Well, this is a story about a midlife crisis and a pivot in direction. Now, I think this story might resonate most with adults and parents, but I also believe that it presents a productive conundrum to teens, for example, who might be in their first extended experience of, what am I doing here? What is this all for? Because I think what normally happens for the teen in existential crisis is that they're told, it will be all right. You'll figure it out. You'll come out the other side. And maybe they do, but maybe they wind up postponing a real reckoning about the meaning and purpose of life. Now, to digress for a moment, this is part of why I love Peter Kropotkin's appeal to the young from 1890. He's addressing this polemic to the young educated class preparing for professions, but he's telegraphing ahead for them several years to show, like in a Dickensian dream, where their efforts will lead. He addresses a young doctor, a young engineer, a young scientist. He tells them all what they will find when they are ultimately deployed to protect capitalist power. To the young lawyer, he presents the scenario in which he is to uphold property law by representing a landlord against a peasant in arrears. Listen to this, quote, "If you reason instead of repeating what is taught you, if you analyze the law and strip off those cloudy fictions with which it has been draped in order to conceal its real origin, which is the right of the stronger and its substance, which has ever been the consecration of all the tyrannies handed down to mankind through its long and bloody history, when you have comprehended this, your contempt for the law will be profound indeed. You will understand that to remain the servant of the written law is to place yourself every day in opposition to the law of conscience and to make a bargain on the wrong side. And since this struggle cannot go on forever, you will either silence your conscience and become a scoundrel, or you will break with tradition and you will work with us for the utter destruction of all this injustice, economic, social, and political. But then you will be a socialist. You will be a revolutionist." So that is the vibe, the spirit of the following story, the feeling of meeting a fork in the road. But the conditions that I'm going to describe here are a little bit more complex. Years ago, I formed a dear online weekly Zoom call relationship with the American journalist Dahr Jamail, who got his stripes as a writer, as an unembedded freelance reporter in Iraq between 2003 and 2007. He wrote for Truth Out, Al Jazeera, The Nation, The Guardian. Unembedded means no protection or talking points from the US military. It means finding local fixers who can show you around and provide introductions under very dangerous circumstances. While there, he is dodging bullets and airstrikes and suffering through the deaths of friends. And this burned him out. And when he returned to the US, he retreated to the mountains of Washington state to recover and maybe try a little homesteading. Now, I didn't know Dahr from his war reporting. I first heard him on an excellent podcast called Last Born in the Wilderness, hosted by Patrick Farnsworth. Dahr was talking about having lost hope in journalism and what that meant for him. I must have listened to that episode about a half a dozen times. How did he recover and find some relief? He took up mountain climbing. He started to travel to do more of it, to near mystical peaks like Denali. He found peace and inner quiet and a love for the glaciers, so much love that when he understood how much the ice had shrunk over the past decades of global warming, he made it his mission to visit and climb the highest mountains of the world and write about it. And the result was a masterpiece of travel memoir and science journalism. And it's a great title for these days. It's called The End of Ice. And the book was lauded around the globe. He was a finalist for the Penn E.O. Wilson Prize in 2020. And in the book, he not only climbed each mountain with an eagle eye for beauty, he also talked to local scientists and mountain folk to hear their stories of climate destruction. And these local interviews were crucial because they really gave a sense of an ongoing silent ecocide that's nonetheless noticed and felt by those on the front line. They, like the Iraqis behind the line of an imperial conflict, had the most important stories, the most inaudible stories, and Dahr went out and found them. Now, after the book was published, with a lot of fanfare, he waited for something to happen. There were glowing reviews from top experts in the field, and he was hopeful this book would move the needle in some way, just as he'd hoped that telling the stories of U.S. imperialism from behind Iraqi lines would help to end the war. But nothing really happened. The book disappeared, as it were, into a giant snowdrift while temperatures rose in tandem with elite empathy. As a writer of books myself, I've had this experience many times. A book is an enormous undertaking. For me, each one is like 3 years minimum. Now, with my last two books, one on cults and modern yoga and the other on conspirituality with my co-hosts Derek and Julian, I too had won high acclaim from prominent figures in the anti-disinfo world and the history of fascism. But in both cases, the publications were followed by mostly silence, as though I had given birth to a child and then given it up for adoption, never to hear from anyone about it ever again. I don't think you have to have high expectations or be an egoist to find this hard to accept. Publishing books about what you feel are urgent matters also gives you a crash course in how quickly the cycles of cultural amnesia spin. My book about yoga cults is 7 years old now, and I still have people reaching out to ask if I know anything about one of the cults extensively documented in the book or in investigative pieces. And then every few months, social media will ripple with news of how the yoga world has an abuse problem, as if this hasn't been established for decades. And commenters on those posts will say, wow, I had no idea. And in the context of the conspirituality book, we now watch wave after wave of influencers go viral with videos that describe the links between yoga and wellness and fascist ideas of the body. And in every one, the creator makes it sound like they've discovered something brand new and extraordinary. And I suppose the upside is that these stories and principles stay current and in circulation, but in a broader sense, it shows that awareness of these issues wouldn't go through these cycles if there was a reliable way to turn journalism into cultural memory, as opposed to a kind of ephemeral and maybe alarmist entertainment. Dahr's book wasn't about cults or disinformation. It was about the impending end of civilization through climate disaster. And unlike books about yoga cults and conspiracy theories, it had a message that demanded immediate and clear action. Surely it would do better, no? Well, you know what he did when it was clear that action wasn't on the way? That his journalism was maybe even feeding the beast of apathy and too much information? He started to get to know some First Nations elders and to talk with them about the cultural and spiritual skills needed to survive genocide and ecocide. And that wasn't about reporting out disasters. He'd done that. Nobody had responded, as far as he could tell. He now turned to documenting wisdom. And he worked for years with Elder Stan Rushworth on a collective volume called We Are the Middle of Forever, Indigenous Voices from Turtle Island on the Changing Earth. And all of this made me think about the Epstein files, 3 million files, 6 million files. How many files are there? How many files do we need? How many connections do we need to make? I think sometimes we want more files and more revelations and more connections because we labor under the delusion of the power of exposure, that somehow sunlight will trigger conscience and accountability. But we haven't seen this happen. There is no cultural or moral norm that can stop capitalism or fascism. We have to build new things. We have to, in my opinion, continue reporting from war zones and shrinking glaciers because we need solid info. But there's also a kind of fork in the road between being big social media creators and podcasters or writing big books that are absorbed into the discourse and maybe putting out little zines and pamphlets that a few hundred people read and cherish and use to help build a new world with each other. We're all going to get older and tired out, and then hopefully more pragmatic about where our energy is best spent. And at some point, maybe most of us will pivot to becoming dogged scavengers of hope. Now, I don't know if that's too melancholic a view for a teenager, but I remember those moments in which the absolute senselessness of the culture and economy and global wars felt overwhelming when I was in my teens. I know my sensitivity to these conditions compelled me to seek relief. But what did I have available? I had an outdated answer from the 1970s. Find a spiritual community, disappear from the world. That didn't work. But I think if someone had laid out for me the possibility that, firstly, I was correct that the world was unmanageably chaotic, and two, if you feel like you have to pause and change direction, that doesn't mean giving up. You can carve out a space in that world where you can focus on the perennial wisdom of those who have been through it before. This accountability crisis, along with information overload, makes it feel like there are no adults or parents in charge in the whole world except those who would harm children. And we who are parents or caregivers or mentors are limited to harm reduction until we build something new with those we care for. Thanks for listening, everybody. Keep safe. Take care of each other.